on today's StoryBeat.
And he dials the number, and Jack Nicholson answers the phone. Hello? I mean, you know it's Jack. He just launches into the spiel that we'd rehearsed a half a dozen times, that we're a couple of film students, we're doing this project, we'd like to interview you. He said, well, yeah, I'll do it, but, I'm getting ready to leave to go do this film in New Jersey and can't do it for a month or two. And we said, no, that's fine. Whenever you can do it, we're happy to wait. He went off to do The King of Marvin Gardens, and when he came back, called him, and he said, all right, come on up. And he gave us his address, and that's how it happened.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Christopher Fryer, is the co-author of the books Jack Nicholson, The Early Years, Bruce Dern, Things I Said But Probably Shouldn't Have, and Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder. I've read Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder and have chatted about it once before on StoryBeat with Chris's writing partner, the outstanding author Robert Crane. I've also read Chris's short story, Hunting License, which is a very entertaining tale about a hunter who doesn't like to kill. You'll need to read it to see how it twists in an unexpected way. Hunting License is the first tale in the wonderful short story collection Beyond Where the Buses Run, which was edited by another terrific StoryBeat guest, Teresa Griffin Kennedy. So for all those reasons and many more, it's my great privilege to welcome the author, Christopher Fryer, to StoryBeat today. Chris, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Steve. It's a real pleasure to be on with you.
Well, the pleasure and privilege is mine. So let's go back in time just a little bit. At what point in your life did you first start noticing writing and writers and books and that sort of thing?
Early on, I couldn't even pinpoint a time. I've always loved books. I've always liked putting pen to paper. Just the physical act of putting ink on paper gives me pleasure and always has. And from early on reading the Hardy Boys, then moving on to Edgar Allan Poe and Rod Serling and things like that, I've always been interested in writing and reading.
So I'm interested that you say that the act of putting pen to paper makes you feel good or you like it. Does the same feeling for you when you type on a typewriter or a computer?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I'm basically a Luddite, and I use technology minimally, but the actual physical writing for me helps with getting ideas out. In a weird twist, I'm a very good speller and always have been, but I can't spell when I'm typing for some reason. If I'm actually writing words for the first time on the typewriter, I have a very difficult time spelling.
That's interesting. So do you write everything longhand first? Then?
Absolutely. Everything is written longhand, then it gets typed, and I enjoy the process. So I write it out longhand and then type it. And as I type it, I edit it, I rewrite when I type, and then I'll print that out and then take that printed page and then go through it and write corrections, edits, changes on the typescript, and then go back and type it again. So essentially, when I get to the point where I have a manuscript from page 1 to the end, it's done. I don't try to go back and rewrite after that point.
So your drafts tend to be 2 drafts, your initial hand draft and then whatever you've typed.
Well, yes, that could actually be 4, 5, 6 times. I will write it out, type it, then rewrite it on the typescript, retype it back and forth until it has the right pace, music, whatever you want to call it.
Well, Rod Serling's a pretty good influence. And in fact, I think as you say it, I now can see a little bit of the Rod Serling influence in Hunting License, which we'll talk about a little way down the road, because it's a little bit in there. It's a little bit offbeat beat, which I think is what Serling was very good at writing. Did you get formal training as a writer anyway?
I took a lot of writing courses in college. I was my mom wanted me to go to a creative writing course one summer when I was maybe 10 or 11, and I went to this place in Encino, which you probably know, on Ventura Boulevard, and I got there, and turned out it was a tap dance class. I don't know. Somewhere in the transmission of what was going to happen, didn't get the right connection with my mom. Anyway, so I had one tap dance class, but it was supposed to be a creative writing class. But in college, I had a mentor of sorts, a professor named Patrick Morrow, who encouraged me a lot, and he was really very influential for both Bob and I, because he was the guy who went through our manuscript for Jack Nicholson face to face, as it was called in the first go around. He gave us suggestions. He read the manuscript before we submitted it to try and sell it. And he was very influential as far as I was concerned. And I had him for several different courses, both literature courses and creative writing courses.
So we'll get back to Nicholson in a bit. I want to cover a couple other things first, but that's really good to know that you had not just a mentor early on, but someone who you could trust to look at your work and help you form it, which is, I think, really important for a lot of newer writers, sometimes even for more mature writers. And by the way, in my years as a writer in Hollywood, I did a lot of tap dancing. So I get that connection quite a bit. So you've written quite a bit of nonfiction, biography and so on, but you've also written fiction as well. Do you think of yourself when you're writing nonfiction as a storyteller?
No, I think of myself as a conduit for the storyteller, because of the work that I've had published, which are essentially other people's memoirs, whether it's Bruce Dern or Jack Nicholson, or before when I was writing for We and Playboy. Bob and I were interviewing people, and they were telling their story. And my job, I always felt, was to be invisible, which is maybe why we had the success we did and have the relationships with the people that we've interviewed, is that they trusted us because we felt that their words were their words. And it wasn't up to us to correct them, to change them. Yes, we could do some editing for clarification, but we essentially wanted them to be them and to sound like them.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you were kind of being a journalist who does not editorialize.
Exactly. That would be exactly right.
You're reporting what you actually see and hear, and you don't try to put a slant on it of any kind.
No. And even early on, when we put the Nicholson book together, which was a collection of interviews with Jack and with people that he worked with up until, say, 1976, it was to make all of them individuals talking about Jack Nicholson, but to give them their own space, whether it's Karen Black or Bruce Dern or Dennis Hopper. It was always to let them sound like them. So we didn't editorialize at all. And even in our introductions to the interviews in that book, we just kind of laid it out. I know one review of the book said that it sounded like the introductions in a playbill that you'd get, assuming that was a dig, that it was just kind of dry and matter of fact, but that's what we wanted to do.
It's like a bio. You're telling information.
Yeah. I mean, we said where it happened, how we got to these people, and that was the reporting.
Well, okay, so I know from doing these many interviews on StoryBeat, and you've done a lot of interviews, obviously, that you can slant the way that a story comes out or your reportage comes out by the way that you ask a question, by how you couch the questions. Were you very careful in the way that you prepared your questions?
No. No, to be perfectly honest, no. We were too young, too enthusiastic, and too naive, probably, to even think thoughts like that.
So when you would ask a question of any of these people, how did you know that the question was not going to then get a negative, nasty, get away from me, kid response? How did you know that?
We didn't. And that negative, nasty response would have been part of what we were after.
it actually would have been gold, wouldn't it?
Yeah, in a sense. And we were 20 when we started. I was 19, in fact, when we started the Nicholson book. We're film fans, and the people we interviewed were people that we were interested in. In fact, from my point of view, every interview I've ever done is because I was interested in that person. So I wasn't interested in talking to people that didn't hold my interest. So when we talked to Jack Nicholson and we decided we were going to do a book and he okayed it and gave it his blessing, the first thing Bob and I did was to make a list of everybody that Jack had worked with to that point and who we were interested in talking to. And then we just started making thousands of telephone calls.
So that was your standard. Your standard was, if you're not interested, you're not doing the interview.
Yeah, which is why I didn't have a Playboy career like Bob did. Bob had worked for Playboy for 20 plus years, interviewing people from Coco the gorilla to, professional golfers and people like that. And I would have loved to have interviewed Coco the gorilla, but some of the other folks, I would not have been that keen to do. So
I see. So well, I find that interesting because, again, this is what I've done for a number of years now as well. And I've talked to any number of people that have been brought to me by folks, and I didn't know of them. So I didn't have an interest in them to start. I found an interest in them by researching who they are and what they've done. Then I became interested in them. But I've had any number of guests on the show who I frankly, you and I had never met before. But I may
be one of those guests who you wish you never had met.
Oh, no. We're already having a good time. So I know that we're in good shape. The point being that it's interesting to me that you managed to have a career in which you were able to only go to people that you knew about and liked or wanted to talk to.
Well, I should say that I didn't make a living as a writer for past 40 years. It was not a sustainable living what I did. Bob did, working for Playboy. I didn't. So I have come along in a few projects that I've been interested in, and I've been lucky enough to be able to do them. And the royalties from the books that I've done are not going to support anybody.
That's so true for so many writers. You're not unique in that way, but yes, I understand. It's a real issue. Clearly, we know that the criterion is you have an interest in the subject that you're going to interview. But what makes a subject interesting to you? Is it just simply that they've had a big movie career, or is there something about that person that draws you to them?
With regard to the books, it was they were the people. Jack Nicholson, to begin with, in the late 60s, early 70s, we kind of have to set this in context. No internet, none of this modern stuff, no cell phones, nothing like that. And what there was film. And there was this wave of new American cinema on the heels of the Nouvelle Vague, as it's called, in which there's a new film out now, kind of glorifying that period of French cinema from the late 50s. But American cinema from the late 60s through the end of the 70s, to me, is unsurpassed in filmmaking.
I agree.
Just so many films. And my wife and I we just went the other night to a 50th anniversary screening of All the President's Men. It's a brilliant, brilliant movie. There's 5 minutes in the middle of the film, no music, just a close-up basically of Robert Redford typing in a newsroom, and it's the most suspenseful 5 minutes you've ever had.
I have, in my classes when I've taught, I have used that as an example of action does not have to actually be people running or cars being driven fast or bombs blowing up. Action can be somebody typing in a room. And you're giving the perfect example of it. And it's a miracle when you see that. That shouldn't work, but it works incredibly well in that particular movie. So, all right. So you find that something has to bring you to it. Something has to compel you to that subject.
Right. And in those days, in 1970, 71, that thing was Jack Nicholson. When Easy Rider debuted in 1969, nobody had heard of Jack Nicholson for the most part, even though he'd done 25 films, he'd produced 5 films, he'd written several films. Nobody knew who he was. Easy Rider opened at the Fox Village Theater in Westwood, which was one of the premier movie palaces in the world at the time. And the line went around the block, and you went in and you watched this movie, and everybody that came out of that film had one thing on their mind, and that was, who was that guy? And they weren't talking about Peter Fonda or Dennis Hopper. They were talking about this crazy guy that played the Southern lawyer. So that's what put him on my radar. And then, 5 Easy Pieces came out, Carnal Knowledge came out, Drive, he said, and these were films that were just unique and grabbed you and were about things. And I still look for films that are about things, about people.
And where do you find those these days?
We are blessed in the Hudson Valley to have several independent cinemas. They're mostly nonprofits, and they're supported by the community memberships. And there's one called Upstate Films, which we go to all the time. We were there a week ago to see a preview of Anemone, the new Daniel Day-Lewis film. And Daniel Day-Lewis was there with his son, Ronan, who directed the film.
Wow.
And this is a 115-seat theater in Saugerties, New York. And the fact that they get somebody like Daniel Day-Lewis to come and talk and do a Q&A after the film is extraordinary. And we're really, really lucky to have that. So that's where we see films, and they get films that you don't, see at the multiplex. I haven't been in a multiplex in years.
Yeah, I've stopped more or less going to movies with people in the audience, and I used to love it. It was a great thrill for me, and now I find it kind of demoralizing, actually, and I prefer to watch them in my home on a nice big screen where I can stop it when I want to stop it. But yeah, that experience, what you're talking about, in a small space, showing a unique movie, there's nothing like it.
I love that experience. I like seeing films on a big screen. We often go at odd times, say 4 p.m, so that there aren't a lot of people there, because I get annoyed by people who are looking at their phones or crinkling, candy wrappers or crunching popcorn.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Nicholson in the early years. So we were talking about him a bit. He has inevitably what is called the it factor. There's something about him when he's on the screen, you can't watch anything else but him. Or if there's someone else you can watch, he's a very big factor in your watching them. And so what do you think it is about Jack Nicholson or Bruce Dern or any big star that gives them that it factor? Can you figure that out?
Well, for me, it's the fact that they're thinking. The characters are thinking. They're not just quoting lines that were written on a script page. And with Nicholson and with Dern, both, there's this sense of unpredictability, that at any moment they're either going to go off the rails or they're going to say something, especially with Bruce, they're going to say something just completely unexpected or do something that's unexpected. Bruce has this saying that he likes to, it's actually his philosophy, is that every day he goes to the set, he wants to do something that's never been done before. And you get that feeling when you're watching Bruce Dern in a film, is that something might happen that you've never seen before. And the same is true with Nicholson. And it's what makes them interesting as actors. And there's a certain edginess to them that gives them a little bit of dangerous quality, especially with Dern, because he played so many psychos. I mean, nobody plays a character on the edge of the abyss better than Bruce. It's a marvel to watch. I'll tell you a story about actors. And one of the things about actors that I find fascinating is how they kindle this emotion that we get through the screen. it comes from some inner furnace that most of us don't have. And I was on the set of The Great Gatsby when Bruce was filming Gatsby in England with Robert Redford and Mia Farrow. And they were doing a scene that took place in the Plaza Hotel. The scene essentially has Daisy coming in. She's all bubbly and cheery. And over the course of about 5 or 6 minutes, it seemed, she goes from that bubbly, effervescent character to breaking down in tears and being distraught and destroyed by what's going on amongst these characters. I watched her do this. And at the end of the scene, with the tears running down her face and the makeup running and everything else, and she did it, and Jack Clayton, the director, would yell, cut, and they'd say, okay, we're going to go again. And 8 takes, which she'd have to have her makeup all redone. And each time she brought up that furnace again to kindle those emotions. And it was the most extraordinary feat of both acting and stamina and emotion. I've never really seen anyone else do something quite like that. It really was extraordinary.
So, all right, so let's go to or talk about for a moment about how in the world you and Bob ever got Jack Nicholson to talk to you in the first place.
Again, luck, naivete, and just perseverance and not understanding what the word no means.
How many times did he say no to you?
He never did. But Bob and I had a class at USC where we were in the film school. He was in the film school. I was an English major. But I took a lot of film courses. And we had this class called The Film Heroes of the 30s and 60s. It was taught by Stephen Karpf, who, with his wife Eleanor, had just written a film called Adam at 6 a.m., which was a pretty big hit. It was Michael Douglas's first big film. So for my thesis for the class, I had just seen Easy Rider a couple of years before, but 5 Easy Pieces had just come out, and that movie just blew me away, 1971. And I went to the professor, Stephen Karpf, and I said, listen, I want to do my thesis paper about anti-heroes, not film heroes, but anti-heroes. And I want to do it about Jack Nicholson, and I'm going to interview him as part of this paper. And he looked at me because he knew way better than I did that that's not going to happen. And at that point, Bob had transferred into this class. We said, well, we'll do it together because that'll help. And he said, go to it. So we said, well, how are we going to do this? And my sister-in-law, her father was this wonderful gentleman named John Strauss, who's a partner of McFadden, Strauss, and Irwin, which was one of the 2 or 3 biggest PR firms, publicity firms in Hollywood. And I called John and I said, John, do you have any kind of a contact for Jack Nicholson, anybody we could call to see if he would do an interview with us? And he said, I don't know. And he gets out his Rolodex and he's flipping through his Rolodex and he goes, I've got a number here. I don't know what it is. He said, you can call it. It might be his publicist, might be his manager. He said, I don't know. I've never spoken to him. I don't have anything to do with him. His client list was Lucille Ball, Bob Hope, Jimmy Stewart, people like that. Real, A-list type people. Jack Nicholson was not on John Strauss's radar in 1971. So I took the number. Bob and I, we went to Bob's house out in Tarzana. I said, well, you call it. I'm not going to call it, you call it. So he's standing with the phone like this between us. It's a wall phone on a cord. And he dials the number and Jack Nicholson answers the phone. You know it's Jack. Hello? It's Jack. And Bob says, yeah, can I speak to Jack Nicholson? And he says, yeah, who's calling? And he just launches into the spiel that we'd rehearsed a half a dozen times, that we're a couple of film students. We're doing this project. We'd like to interview you. He said, well, yeah, I'll do it. But, I'm getting ready to leave to go do this film in New Jersey and can't do it for a month or 2. And we said, no, that's fine. Whenever you can do it, we're happy to wait. And that's when he went off to do The King of Marvin Gardens, Bob Rafelson's film that he did with Bruce Dern and Ellen Burstyn. And when he came back, I was like November of, I'm going to say 71. And we called him and he said, all right, come on up. And he gave us his address. And that's how it happened. So it was luck. I'll do this, but I don't want you to publish it, because he doesn't do interviews very often. He thinks doing interviews destroys the ability for an audience to accept him as a character, which I think is pretty true. Because if you've just seen somebody on Johnny Carson or, now Colbert or Jimmy Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel, and you see them the next night in a movie, you say, oh, I get it. Okay, that's the guy I saw last night. And he doesn't.
It's an act. They see the act.
And Jack never wanted that. So we said, no, this is for our paper. And but then here's where the serendipity and the luck kind of comes into it, is we started bumping into him around town. Bob bumped into him at a Rolling Stones concert, and I ran into him at an anti-Vietnam War protest at UCLA. We saw him at a McGovern rally. And and meanwhile, his career is moving along a pace. We said to him one day, we'd like to do a book about you. What do you think? Just about your films, not about, your personal life or anything, just about your movies. And he said, all right. He said, but I'm not going to help you. And we said, no, it's fine, as long as you don't say no and stand in our way. And everybody we called, that goes back to that list we made. The first question everyone asked us was, does Jack know about this? And when we said, yeah, he gave us his blessing, doors opened. We were given the keys to the kingdom.
Wow. Yeah. That's what it would take with a guy like him. So he's notorious for being a bit aloof or keeping people at bay. And obviously he let you into the castle, at least for a short period of time. Did you find him to be difficult to talk to when you were interviewing him?
Oh, not at all. No, it was great. I mean, after 3 hours, he got a little fed up, but as anybody would. But he was very open and good with us. But again, our interest was filmmaking. In the book, Face to Face, or the early years as it's called now, we thought the first question that we had to which says maybe more about us, but the question that was burning in our minds that we asked first and foremost was, who edited Easy Rider? Because Easy Rider was this big hit, and everybody talked about how brilliantly it was edited. And there was all this talk about, Hopper edited it, and then he brought somebody else in, and Peter Fonda did some editing, and then and Jack claimed he did some editing. So our mindset was, well, we have to resolve this issue of the editing of Easy Rider. And it seems pretty silly now, but at the time, that's what we were really interested in.
What did he say?
He said that a lot of people worked on it. He worked on it. Dennis did the first cut. Henry Jaglom did some editing on it. There were quite a few people that had a hand in the editing of it.
Mm-hmm. Were there any other challenges that you faced in putting that book together? Was it getting to any of these other people, just getting them to talk to you, period?
There were some. Bob Rafelson, the aforementioned Bob Rafelson, who directed Jack in several films, and Five Easy Pieces and The Fortune. We called him, and he was one of the three heads of BBS Productions in Hollywood. And we called him. He said, does Jack know about this? We said, yes. And he said, I won't do an interview, but I will help you in any other way I can. He let us use offices at BBS to do interviews. He did screenings for us. We saw a screening of The King of Marvin Gardens, not a rough cut, but not the final cut. He invited us to come see it. He gave us 16 millimeter prints of Head, a film that he and Jack did with the Monkees, to screen for ourselves. He loaned that to us. He was incredibly generous. He just didn't want to do an interview, so we didn't. And we didn't press him. We didn't want to wreck our relationship with him. So we said, okay, fine. And we just took the help we could get.
Well, that seems to be your thing, by the way, that you're not salacious in any real mean-spirited way like some authors are. You want to get to the bottom of the truth of whatever they're saying.
No, and I guess the primary exemplar of that is, and I'm sure you know Jack's family history. Everybody seems to know now that he was raised by his grandmother, who he thought was his mother, and he lived with his sisters, who were actually one. June was actually his mother, and the other sister was Lorraine, and she was actually his aunt. Well, Jack didn't know that in 1971, 72, 73, and it only came to light when a Newsweek reporter brought it up in 1974. Bob and I knew about it in 1973. When we sold the manuscript for the book, there was some pre-publication publicity, I forget where, but I got a letter in the mail from a woman who was married to Jack's biological father. And she said that he was always portrayed in the press as a deadbeat and a drunk, and he was nothing like that. And he was a very decent man, and would we please not do that in our book if we brought it up? And this was all news to us, by the way. So Bob and I had a conference, and we said, what do we do with this information? It's 1973. Jack has never spoken about this publicly. We didn't even know if he knew that his grandmother was not his mother. And we decided that it was not our place to bring it up. It wasn't our story to tell. It wasn't our information to ask him about, because he's a private person, and he obviously didn't talk about it if he knew about it, because he didn't want to talk about it. So we didn't bring it up. To this day, I think that was the right decision.
Well, I think the listener should pay attention to what Chris just said, because it demonstrates this little funny thing called scruples or morals, and that there are lines that you can cross, and they can be crossed, but that doesn't make them right to cross.
And yes, we could have scooped Time magazine, and it might have made our book a bestseller, but that wasn't the point. Our book was about Jack and his films. It wasn't about Jack's family and what happened to him, the serendipity that brought him into the world. That wasn't our focus. We weren't after that. And we didn't do that with anybody that we spoke to.
So did you do a bunch of research on his early career, where there were all those things that he did where he was completely unknown when he was working for Hanna-Barbera, for instance? Did you go back that far?
Well, we knew that he started in the mailroom at Hanna-Barbera, but we did go back and see. I think we saw all of his early films, from The Crybaby Killer to the Monty Hellman existential westerns, Ride in the Whirlwind, and
Did you get in there, Little Shop of Horrors?
Yeah, Little Shop of Horrors. I loved it. I loved Nicholson in Little Shop of Horrors. He was doing Peter Lorre, which I don't know whether people knew it or no Novocaine, please. He was hilarious in the role.
He was hilarious in the role, and over the top, and that was a precursor to everything else that he did, more or less, because his performances are very real while being over the top. It's almost, I don't know how you achieve that, but because if you're that over the top in some cases, it's not watchable, but he makes it very compelling.
Yeah, it's like his role as the Joker in the Batman film.
Exactly,
exactly. He's been quoted as saying that he looks at that performance as a piece of pop art. And it is. It's brilliant, but sadly, in my estimation, it was the beginning of the end as far as his acting goes, because he kind of became a caricature of himself, I think, from then on.
But he's still pretty good at doing all of that. I mean, you can go all the way up to The Departed, and in The Departed, he's still over the top, but yet it's pretty amazing. The Shining, he's completely over the top.
I look at The Shining as a comedy. I think it's hilarious.
Was there anything that you were trying to get during the course of your creating that book, writing that book, that you wish you had gotten but were completely unable to get anywhere near?
Very badly, we wanted to interview Mike Nichols. And he was shooting Day of the Dolphin at the time. And we had correspondence with him, and he had agreed to do it, but there was just not a time, because we had given ourselves a deadline. We had been working on it for 3 years, and we said, we got to wrap this baby up. And we just ran out of time, couldn't wait any longer. But we wrote him a letter. We got a very nice letter back from Mike Nichols. If you remember in The Graduate, in the opening scene, the party scene, when Benjamin is at home and his parents are having a party for him, his mom says to him, "Oh, you've got to go over and say hello to so-and-so. They've come all the way from Tarzana." Because our envelope to Mike Nichols had a return address of Tarzana, he wrote back and he said, "I'm so happy. I've never actually spoken to anybody from Tarzana."
Well, you had no idea that you were using an in.
No, but it would have been great. We would have loved to have had an hour or so with Mike Nichols. That would have been wonderful. And the only other really that I wish we'd had was normally when we'd sit down with someone for an interview, we would have them sign a release before we did the interview, or at least at the end of the interview when they knew we weren't out to get them. We just have them sign a release saying we could use a photo, an image of them, and the contents of the interview that we had just recorded. And we forgot to do that with Sally Struthers, who was in 5 Easy Pieces with Jack. And she was quite famous for being on All in the Family and as the meathead's wife. And when I called her, she lived actually down the block from me in Westwood. When I called her to say, we forgot to get you to sign a release. It's just a formality that we can use the information that we taped. And she said, "Well, I want to read it first." And we said, "Well, we don't normally let anybody read, the final version." I said, "It's okay. We're not out to get you." And we gave her a copy of the finished interview. And in the interview, she'd been in a film called The Getaway with Steve McQueen. And evidently Steve McQueen was not a very pleasant person, not a helpful partner as an actor. And she kind of ripped him while in the interview. When I went to pick up the release, she said, "You have to take this out or I'll never work again in Hollywood." And I cajoled and I said, "Oh, Sally, come on." I said, "Nobody's going to see this." And she said, "I can't." And so I agreed to take it out. And I'm sorry that happened. I would have liked to have had that in there, but
I'm sure it didn't help on the set of The Getaway that it was being directed by Sam Peckinpah, who I think is one of the greatest directors ever, but allegedly an impossible man to work with.
Yeah, and the two of them, McQueen evidently had quite an ego and from what I understand, and I never met him, I don't really know anything about him on a level, but the stories I've heard is that his way of working was attack before you get attacked.
So let's talk for a moment about Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder. You've written several books with Bob Crane, and this is Bob Crane is Robert Crane's father. And the book is a very intense telling of this untimely the life of, and then the untimely notorious murder of Bob Crane from Hogan's Heroes fame. I'm just curious, Bob was your friend for a long time at the point that you sat down to work on that book with him. How challenging was it for you to deal with clearly what has to have been a very deeply personal issue for Bob while writing together on that book?
It might have been difficult. You'd have to get it from him. It wasn't difficult for me. My job on that, and I had been encouraging him to do that book for years. We had talked for many, many years about doing some kind of book about his dad's murder. It's more than just his dad's murder. It's about his relationship with John Candy and John Candy's death. It's about his first wife, Kari, and Kari's early demise from breast cancer. It's a book about life and tragedy and renewal and just getting through it. I thought it was a great story. And Bob, as you may or may not know, having spoken to him, he like Nicholson is a really private person, and he always has been. And part of what makes our friendship work is that we respect that privacy of the other person, but we understand that we've been let in to that inner room. So my job, as I saw it on the book, was to kind of open that door a crack and get Bob to talk about his feelings about what had happened. Because the real impact of the book is that in the course of the book, he loses his father, he loses his wife, he loses his job and his employer and his friend in a relatively short span of time. So it's a roller coaster ride of both highs and lows in a lifetime, and maybe in more than one lifetime.
Well, it's a testament to the strength of his personal character.
Exactly.
Because he survives quite a bit in, as you say, a very short period of time. And a bunch of it is with people that are famed, with celebrity. You've got celebrity right there in the title. And so it's not in the background. It's not, unknown. It's unknown. So that's why I wondered how challenging it was for you, but you're saying that it was relatively easy for you.
You will know this because you do your research before you interview somebody. But for me, I was there for most of it. I was there when his dad was murdered. I wasn't in Phoenix, obviously, but I was with him the next day. I was with him when his parents were getting divorced. Which was pretty traumatic for him and his family. We have a shared history. And likewise, he's been with me through some trials and tribulations. So we have that shared history, which makes it easy, made it easy for me to say, here's what we're going to talk about. And I would just have to, like a jockey, he was the horse and I was the jockey, and I had to know when to give him the whip, when to give him his head, when to pull him up. Pulling him up was never an issue, but it was the goading to get him to go, which was the hard part.
What was your process in putting it together? Did you sit down and decide you're going to do it in this particular order? Is it, we're going to do it chronologically, we're not going to do it chronologically? How did you make those decisions?
We had kind of a rough outline to go chronologically, but when we finished and we then had we taped everything and then had the transcripts done, and then we worked from paper as we're wont to do. We had, maybe 1,000 pages of transcript and cut the sections together. And then we structured the book, and the book is kind of, up to date moment, then a flashback, up to date, or it starts with a flashback at the murder of his father. And then we come up to date and then back and forth and back and forth. And we liked that process. So that was more of an editing thing. And Bob's a terrific editor when it comes to putting the collage together that will become a book. We work really well that way together because I'm more concerned about the pace and the language and the momentum of the sentences. And he's very good about putting the structure of the outside architecture of it together.
Did you have to obtain any clearances or rights to include things?
No, because it's Bob's story. He's telling it from his perspective. It's in the first person. Mm-hmm. And the people that would have sued us were dead. And so we were free to, badmouth them if we wanted to.
I think the listeners need to pay attention to this. I get asked this question frequently by writers and other people in the arts, and that is a rights issue, which is, can be very, very difficult if you don't have rights to something. But you're saying something that's very truthful. If it's your story that you're writing, and as long as I think, and you correct me if you think I'm wrong, as long as you're not slandering someone or defaming them in some way, it's your story. So you can tell that story and not worry about whether or not you need to obtain rights to tell it.
Well, exactly. I'm not well versed about the slander laws or libel laws, but if you're expressing an opinion, you're perfectly within your rights to do that. And if you're telling your story, you know, you are perfectly allowed to say, wow, I interviewed Chris Fryer. What a jackass. You know, that's within your rights to do that.
Now, if I did that, it wouldn't be my show, Chris. No matter what I'm thinking. What was your favorite moment from the book? What stands out for you from that book that was like, wow, that's a wow moment?
Oh, I don't think I could pinpoint one. For me, the wow was the process of doing it. It was just like everything Bob and I have done. It was the process is fun. We have just an incredibly great time when we're together, whether we're on the phone or we're in the same room. If we go out to eat, we laugh a tremendous amount. We entertain each other. Everybody else might think we're just idiots, but we just get a big kick out of each other, and we have a great time. So doing the book to me was the highlight. It's not the content, it was the process.
Got it. Well, that's a wonderful thing when the work itself is at least equally, if not more so, fun and enjoyable than the finished product.
It goes back to what I was saying about only wanting to interview people I was interested in. I'm not that ambitious, and I'm very much interested in the things I'm interested in. So that's my impetus.
So you write this great title of a book, Bruce Dern, Things I've Said But Probably Shouldn't Have. I'm guessing that's a quote of his, yes?
That is a quote of his. And in all fairness, we didn't decide on that as the title. As with many great titles, that was the editor, Eric Nelson, at John Wiley & Sons, who said, oh, this is the title.
It's catchy. It's a good title. It grabbed your eye. Give us an example of something that Bruce Dern said that he shouldn't have.
He says a lot of things that he might not or shouldn't have said about people. Bruce is very forthcoming. Bruce will tell you, one of the things that makes him so great as an interview, he'll tell you how much he made on a film. He'll tell you what his salary was. He'll tell you what the other people were making. He'll tell you whether or not he actually had sex with Maude Adams during the sex scene on Tattoo. He doesn't have a governor on the motor there between his ears for most of the time. But having said that, I wouldn't like to say what he said that he shouldn't have said. That would be more something that he would have to be the one.
Well, give us an example of something that he said that you found truly remarkable. Was it the idea of sex with Maude Adams or not?
Now, again, with Bruce Dern stories, there could be a little bit of exaggeration going on there. There's a little embroidery going on. You never know. And if Bruce tells you the story, it's a sure bet that you're going to hear the same story again, maybe the next day or 3 days later. I mean, Bob and I spent 88 hours with Bruce Dern, and we heard many stories multiple times, and they always had a little different twist on them. Well, there's always that little embroidery that goes on, and that's part of what makes Bruce Dern an unforgettable actor.
Do you think he knows he's doing that, or is that just happening?
Yeah, I think he does. One of the stories that he told us was he was doing a film called Middle-Aged Crazy with Anne Margaret. It's about a guy going off the rails when he hits, 40, which seems laughable to me now. But he buys a Porsche. He goes through the midlife crisis. Anyway, he's got this sex scene with Anne Margaret, and when they get into the bed, and he's wearing his underwear, and she gets into the bed, and of course she's naked, and she says to him, "Get those off! What are you doing?" And so he says, I'll take them off, but he says, I'm going to apologize beforehand if I get hard or if I don't get hard. So it's things like that. I don't know if he should have said that, but it's in there.
That's a great line. I apologize in advance, right? All right. So I have to ask you about your your fictional work, your short story that I've read, Hunting License, I thoroughly enjoyed reading. You've not written a ton of fiction, have you?
Well, I have written a ton, just it's never seen the light of day.
It's unpublished.
It's unpublished work for the most part, although I do have a pretty impressive stack of New Yorker rejections.
You could publish those.
I joke with Bob. I said, I've got a story I was going to send to the New Yorker, but I got the rejection before I put it in the mail saying, please don't send this.
So which do you prefer writing, fiction or
non-fiction? I do that for me. It goes back to what I was saying about just the physical act of writing, just putting the pen on the paper and using words in what, like Bruce Dern says, maybe in a way that's never quite been done before, although I think everything's been done before. But to get a metaphor or a simile that is perfect, that sounds good, that has the right rhythm or to it is just, there's something just heartwarming about it to me. And I'll tell you an interesting thing that I learned when Hunting License was published. I've gone back over the years and I have a stack of short stories, quite a pile. And I go back periodically and, well, I'll pull one out and read it and I'll make a few little corrections or I'll change something, rewrite something because it doesn't work, or I find that I can do it better or more succinctly, usually is the case. I enjoy them. I go back and I read them again and I still get a certain pleasure out of reading it. But once Hunting License was published, it's like it wasn't mine anymore. It was gone and I don't get the same pleasure. I read it once in the book itself and I thought, I'm not going to read this anymore.
Well, it's the only fiction of yours that I've read. I found it to be very poetic and in a very interesting way with characters that are very fascinating and compelling. I'm just wondering, where did the story come from? It's not from your real life, is it?
Well, it is and it isn't. We live in the woods. We have bears regularly out outside the house trying to take down our bird feeders. And we spend a lot of time hiking in this reserve that's just down the road from us called the Black Rock Forest. The essence of that story, which is the nature of the world, the wild world, that part of it is true. That part of it is my experience of the world. It's the way I feel about the world, the natural world. And I'm much more at home amongst the trees than I am amongst people.
The concrete jungle.
Yes, as the character Purdy is. He seems to be able to read the signposts in the forest, but when he gets back to town, he's kind of lost. And I can understand that sensibility.
Well, I can understand that sensibility too. So in other words, the underlying plot, which I don't want to give away, that was not anything that happened to you.
No, you mean, the bears packing heat? No, that's never happened. But the whole idea of that has kind of fascinated me. I mean, I think there's even a line in the story when the character puts on his vest, his high visibility vest, with the hunting license pinned to the back of it, which you see a lot of guys dressed like that around where we live. And coming up, actually, hunting season starts in a couple of weeks. We'll see a lot of guys dressed like that. And I've always thought, oh, that's a perfect bullseye if the animals could shoot back.
So is that where the idea came from?
Yeah, basically. I was in a little DeChico's supermarket, and there was a guy in front of me waiting to check out, and he had all his hunting gear on and his numbered hunting license on his back. And I thought, that's a bullseye for somebody.
Is your process in writing fiction similar to your process in nonfiction? That is to say, you sit down, you write it out longhand, you type it, you revise it once or twice, and it's good to go. Is that your process?
That is absolutely the process. Only there are probably 6 or 7, 8 or 9 rewrites along the way before it goes on the stack.
Do you tend to outline your work before you start to write it, or do you just write
No,
it?
I just write it. I have a good idea of the story and where it goes, but part of what's fun for me in the writing is not knowing everything, not knowing where it's going to go, and letting the story and the characters kind of tell you or lead you in that direction. And that's the interesting part. Things will come up in the course of the writing that you had no idea about. So I'm not a big outliner. I just kind of have an idea about it. And I do a lot of work in my head in the forest when I'm walking.
And so you actually are trying to be surprised as the reader might be surprised.
Exactly. Yeah. It is a discovery. It's a voyage of discovery.
And how often in your writing fiction, have you come to this discovery, you've written it, and then realized it didn't work at all and I've got to change it totally? Has that happened for you?
If I believe in the story, which is the most important, if the through line of the story or where I think it's going to go, if that works, then somehow make it work. And that might take ages. I have a story that I've been working on, a novel, in fact, although I hate to even talk about it, but it started as a contemporary piece and it's now historical fiction, to give you an idea. I mean, I literally started writing it in the early 1980s and I am still working on it. There was a long period of time where I just stopped because I couldn't make it work in my head. Recently, I kind of worked it out and I've been moving along, for me, at a fairly good pace and hope to have it done in the next 40 years. So.
Well, I certainly hope you get it done in the next 40 years too. And by the way, today, it's quite obvious, today, one doesn't really need a publisher anymore to get it out in the world. You can do it yourself.
For me, it doesn't count. If you throw it up on Amazon, it doesn't count. Somebody said once, you might call yourself a writer, but you're never really a writer until somebody else calls you a writer.
Well, until someone else pays you for it.
Exactly. To me, the legitimization of this thing that I'm working on would be a legitimate publishing house saying, yes, we will pay you for this because this is valuable. For me to put that out on Amazon doesn't do anything for me, and I don't care whether anybody reads it or not. So that isn't why I write. I write for me.
Because it has not been, this is interesting to me, it has not been your main source of income for your life.
No.
So the writing has never been driving you to write it, to get it out, to make money with it. You write because it does something for your soul.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's fascinating. I've been having so much fun having this tremendous conversation that we could go on for hours with Chris Fryer about his writing and his process and all the things that he's done and people that he's met. I think it's fascinating, the people you've met as well. We're going to wind the show down a little bit. I'm just wondering, in all of your experiences, you've told us a lot of very funny stories already and a lot of kind of quirky stories too. I'm wondering, do you have a story you can share with us that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or just plain funny?
Well, there is a story. There's a story from the Nicholson book going back to that early era. And again, I would remind your listeners that we're talking about the early 1970s. So no internet. If you wanted to do research about Jack Nicholson or a film that he did, you had to really hustle. We spent hours at the Margaret Herrick Library at the Academy going through old information, old magazines, old Hollywood reporters to get background or information about early films of Jack Nicholson's. There was no internet to dial up Crybaby Killer and see who the cast was. We had to track down lobby cards. We had to track down stuff like that. We spent untold hours at Larry Edmund's Cinema Bookshop. I think it was on the Sunset Strip, going through
Hollywood Boulevard.
Yeah, going through these bins of old publicity photos and things like that. So that was the era we were in. And we tracked down these photos, and we were really lucky. As I mentioned earlier on, Bob Rafelson was really helpful getting us, just what one would call merch now, but, one sheets, posters from the films, lobby cards. Henry Jaglom, who directed Jack in a film called A Safe Place with Orson Welles, he took us to his house and showed us home movies that he'd made with Jack Nicholson. He gave us photos that we could use in the book that were his photos that he had taken. And he said, no, you can use them, go ahead. And so it was this, scavenger hunt of collecting material. And we got somewhere a photo. I'm going to show you the photo.
Of course, our listeners won't be able to see it, but
they won't be able to see it. But if they go out and buy Jack Nicholson, The Early Years from the University Press of Kentucky, available online or wherever you get your books, it's on page, it's in the photo group in the middle. But I'm going to show it to you, Steve, if you can see. I can't really see, but see that photo? It's Roman Polanski. I'll describe it. It's Roman Polanski, Bob Evans, who produced Chinatown, and a woman holding a cigar who looks incredibly like Faye Dunaway, who was the co-star of Chinatown. And we came across this photo, and we loved this photo. It's just a great photo of Bob Evans and Roman Polanski. And we wanted to use it. And we said, well, what are we going to do? Is that Faye Dunaway? Is that not Faye Dunaway? And it's the Faye Dunaway camp. And Bob said, nah, I don't think that's Faye Dunaway. And I said, I think it is. And we literally argued for 3 years before the book was published, up to and including the final edit with M. Evans and Company, who published it in New York, when they wanted the captions for the films. And we argued about that photo. And I said, look, here's the bottom line. Either we identify the woman as Faye Dunaway, or we have to say Bob Evans, Roman Polanski, and a woman who looks incredibly like Faye Dunaway in the caption. And we can't cut her out. There was no Photoshop in those days. We can't cut her out because her hand's in the way with this cigar. And so we'd have to explain why there's a hand there. Anyway, we decided to go with Faye Dunaway, and we identified it, and that's the way it's in the book, in the original book. Anyway, cut to, the book's been published. We called Jack, and at this point, Jack hasn't seen us in a year or year and a half, something like that. And we call him up and we go, Jack, we've got the book. It's coming out next week. We want to bring you a copy. And yeah, Chris, what is this book? He says to me, the book we were working on with you and all the people that you worked with. It's finally been published. It's coming out. We go up to the house. He says, all right, come on up. We race up to his house. And it's like we're presenting our firstborn, which in a way we were. And we give it to him. And he opens it up. We're standing in his living room, and he was pretty, I think he was impressed. He was flattered, just pretty impressed that these two 20-year-olds managed to do this, or as Bruce Dern always referred to us, the two guys from the Texaco station managed to do this. And he's looking through the book, and literally within, I'm going to say 30 seconds, he stops, he looks, he goes, yeah, that isn't Faye Dunaway. And Bob just gives me one of these looks and shakes his head.
And do we know who it was?
No, I had no idea. No idea.
It's not Faye Dunaway.
It's not Faye Dunaway.
That's hilarious.
Ever since then, so going on, 50 plus years, I'll say to Bob, oh, I saw Daniel Day-Lewis the other night. Yeah, and you probably saw Faye Dunaway too, right? So I'm notorious for, seeing people that aren't there. It's a celebrity hallucination.
That's hilarious. All right, so last question for you today, Chris. You've given us a huge amount of advice all along the way in this show, and I'm wondering if you have a single solid piece of advice that you like to give to those who are just starting out, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to get to the next level as a writer or whatever.
My advice is to practice the craft. Just put words on paper, read things. It doesn't have to be fiction, doesn't have to be nonfiction. Just read the New York Times every day. It's amazing what information I get every day from the New York Times. And the writing is brilliant for the most part. And it is a craft. It's a craft of putting one word after another. The other thing I would say is get the hell out of the house. If it's just go walk in the woods or get on a plane, go somewhere. To me, the greatest thing you can do is to travel and to get a sense of the world and to see the world and people from different perspectives, because Americans in particular are unbelievably blinkered in their view of the world. And I'm fortunate that my wife and I have had years of traveling around the globe. But that perspective allows you to let your mind expand. Literally, I mean, even being a child of the 60s, I wasn't into mind expansion of the chemical kind. But that kind of mind expansion is invaluable if what you want to do is right.
I agree. I totally agree. I think that's two truly valuable pieces of advice. One is there's only one way to get to be a writer of substance, and that's to write. That's the first piece. And the second piece is if you don't go find the world, go look at the world and experience it, how are you supposed to then translate anything onto paper?
There's an old cliche that you hear in every writing class that you should write what you know. Mm-hmm. But if you don't know anything, because you haven't been anywhere and you haven't done anything, then that's not going to make for very interesting writing. And that's not to say that you should write your own experience and let that pose as fiction. I have a real pet peeve about reading about novels that are about, a young woman who's a daughter of a diplomat who, grows up in an embassy on another part of the world. And then the author's bio is, so-and-so is the daughter of a diplomat and grew up in Addis Ababa. That doesn't cut it for me. It's not so much write what you know as it is write what you're feeling. And that feeling only gets expanded because of what you know and where you've been and what you've seen.
I tell people to write what they know in their heart.
Exactly right. That's it's it in a nutshell. There's a wonderful book. One of my favorite books is called West with the Night, and it was. Oh, do you know it?
I've read it.
Yeah, Beryl Markham.
Beryl Markham.
Nobody knows Beryl Markham, but Beryl Markham was the first woman to fly solo from east to west across the Atlantic. Everybody knows Lindbergh did it going from west to east. And Amelia Earhart was the first woman to do it in the same direction. But Beryl Markham did it against the wind, coming the other direction. And she had this extraordinary life growing up in Kenya. And I was in Kenya in 1985, and she was still alive and managed through, again, this silly combination of perseverance and luck to find out where she lived, get in touch with her people, and go out and talk to Beryl Markham, who was in her 80s at the time. And it was amazing.
Christopher Fryer, I can't thank you enough for your time, your energy, and your wisdom, and for sharing all these great stories. I thank you kindly.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Steve.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.